Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. For as long as I could remember, it was the one day of the year when my family came together under one roof, sharing stories and laughter, passing plates piled high with turkey and mashed potatoes, and reminding each other how grateful we were to be together. This year was supposed to be no different, except for one thing. I was coming back from the hospital. Fresh out of surgery, tired but determined. I had fought tooth and nail to get better, to walk again, to be strong enough to join them for Thanksgiving dinner. I wanted to see my son, my grandchildren, feel that warmth again. But what I found instead was cold, sharp, and humiliating. The day started with a sense of cautious hope. The snow had dusted everything in white overnight, turning our Ohio neighborhood into a postcard-perfect winter scene. The air smelled crisp clean. I dressed carefully, choosing my favorite sweater, the one Mark always said made me look like I was wrapped in sunshine. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and smiled. A little smile, weak but genuine. Mark had called a few times in the week after my surgery, checking in, reminding me to rest, promising that Thanksgiving would be special. I counted the days, imagining the smells in the kitchen, the chatter around the table. I felt a flutter in my chest, a mix of excitement and nerves. Would I still fit in after all this? Would they remember me as I was? When I arrived, Mark was the first to greet me. His hug was warm, familiar, just the way I hoped. But then I saw her. Karen, my daughter-in-law. There was something in her eyes, a coldness, a distance that hadn't been there before. "You've been in the hospital," she said, her voice clipped, sharp. "You probably still smell like it. It's better if you eat in the garage, just to be safe." I blinked, confused. I thought I'd misheard her. "In the garage?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. Karen nodded, her jaw tight. "Yes. We can't have you spreading anything to the rest of us." I looked around the room, searching for support, for someone, anyone, to speak up for me. But all I saw were averted eyes and uneasy silence. Mark's face was pale. He looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't. I felt the room tilt slightly. The laughter and warmth I'd imagined were gone, replaced by a wall of cold indifference. The front door closed behind me with a finality I hadn't expected. I stood on the doorstep for a moment, holding my purse tightly, feeling the chill of the November wind bite through my sweater. The garage was dim, cold, and smelled faintly of oil and mildew. They'd left a folding chair for me and a paper plate with a sandwich and some chips. I sat down slowly, my joints stiff, the ache in my side reminding me of the surgery I'd just endured. No one came out to check on me. No one asked if I needed anything. I could hear muffled voices from inside, the clinking of glasses, laughter, the hum of conversation. It sounded like a different world. The night stretched long and lonely. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering, watching the snow fall silently outside the small window. I thought about the years I'd spent raising Mark, the birthdays, the graduations, the nights I stayed up when he was sick. I thought about the love I'd given, the sacrifices I'd made, and now I was the outsider, the one who smelled like hospital. Tears pricked my eyes, but I swallowed them back. I didn't want them to see me cry. Not after everything. That night, as I lay awake on the creaky chair, my mind raced. How had it come to this? Was I really less to them now? Was my pain, my recovery, my very presence a burden? The answer was bitter but clear. They didn't want me. Not like this. And if I wasn't good enough to sit with them at the table, then maybe I didn't want to be part of their family anymore. The next morning, I barely spoke. Mark called to check on me, but his voice was distant. Karen was busy, too busy for niceties or apologies. I wandered through the house, touching the walls, the furniture. Everything seemed foreign and cold. The house felt less like a home and more like a stage for their performance of family. I thought about my options, about what I could do to reclaim my dignity. A lawyer's name came to mind, an old friend who had helped me before. Maybe it was time to take a stand. I wasn't going to be forgotten. As the days passed, I replayed the moment in the garage over and over. Every word, every glance. It burned like a wound, fresh and raw. But beneath the pain, a fire kindled. If they wanted to treat me like I was less, then I would show them exactly what that cost. Because family wasn't just about blood or tradition. It was about respect. And I had given them years of it. Now, it was their turn to learn what it meant to lose me. The silence after Thanksgiving was deafening. I sat alone in my small apartment, the hum of the heater the only sound to keep me company. Outside, the winter winds rattled the windows, but inside, I felt a storm raging all the same. A quiet storm of anger, sorrow, and betrayal. I kept replaying Karen's words in my mind. You smell like hospital. It's better if you eat in the garage. The cruelty of it wasn't just in what she said, but in what it meant. In the message it sent loud and clear, that I was unwanted, unclean, a danger even to those who claimed to love me. I remembered how, for years, I had been the one who prepared these holiday meals. How my hands, trembling now with age but still steady then, had chopped vegetables and basted turkeys. How my voice had told stories and laughed at jokes that made the room bright. And now, I was the one eating cold food alone outside, while they celebrated inside without me. I gripped the arms of my chair, knuckles white, trying to hold myself together. But tears came anyway, hot and unforgiving. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout at Mark, my son, to stand up for me, to tell Karen that this was wrong, that I was his mother. But the truth was, Mark didn't say a word. He let it happen. That silence hurt more than Karen's words. I thought about all those years of sacrifice. How I worked 2 jobs to put Mark through college. How I dropped everything to care for my sick mother. How, even when I was tired, I always made sure my family felt loved. Was that worth nothing now? The loneliness settled deep into my bones. I thought about the nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was what growing old meant, being cast aside, invisible, disposable. But somewhere beneath the hurt, a stubborn ember glowed. No, I would not be invisible. I would not let them erase me. I would find a way to reclaim my dignity, to remind them who I was. I pulled out an old photo album, pages yellowed and corners worn. Pictures of birthdays, graduations, family vacations, all reminders of better times, of a family that once was. I traced a finger over a photo of Mark as a boy, grinning wide with a missing front tooth. Mommy, he had called, running into my arms. I remembered feeling like the most important person in the world. And I still was. That night, I made a decision. I would see a lawyer. I would make sure my family knew that disrespect had consequences. Because if I was not good enough to sit at their table, then they were not good enough to inherit what I had worked so hard to build. I would show them that respect was not a gift, but a demand. And they would learn it the hard way. Days passed, but the ache inside me did not fade. I returned to the hospital for my follow-up appointment, each visit a reminder of my vulnerability, but also of my strength. I had survived the surgery. I was healing. They could try to push me out, but I was still here, still fighting. At home, I began to plan quietly. I contacted my lawyer, an old friend named Susan, who listened with kind eyes and steady hands. She told me about revising wills and trusts, about protecting assets from those who would take advantage. It's your right, she said firmly. You don't have to endure this. Her words were balm to my bruised spirit. I began to write letters in my mind. Letters I would send to Mark and Karen. Letters that would make them understand that their actions had consequences far beyond a cold meal in a garage. I pictured the look on Karen's face when she realized she wouldn't get a dime. I imagined Mark's silence turning into regret. And yet, beneath all the anger, there was sadness. Sadness for the family I had loved so fiercely. Sadness for the memories now tainted with betrayal. But I knew one thing for sure. I would never let anyone make me feel small again. Never. Because dignity is earned, yes, but it is also fiercely protected. And I was ready to protect mine with everything I had. The weeks after that Thanksgiving passed like a slow, suffocating winter. Each morning, I woke with a heavy weight pressing on my chest, a mix of sorrow, anger, and the lingering sting of rejection. But beneath the surface of those feelings, something was growing, a quiet power, fueled by the determination not to be broken. Every time I thought of that night, sitting alone in the garage while snowflakes settled silently around me, I felt the fire flare up again. It wasn't just about the humiliation anymore. It was about standing up for myself, demanding the respect I deserved. I knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy. Karen and Mark were not people who gave up easily either. Karen, with her steely eyes and sharp tongue, was used to getting her way. Mark, my son, was caught somewhere in the middle, torn between loyalty to his wife and the blood of his mother. I had to tread carefully. I started by gathering my thoughts, writing them down in a notebook I kept beside my bed. I poured my heart into those pages, my pain, my memories, my hopes. I reread the letters I planned to send. Not angry letters, no, that wouldn't serve me, but letters that spoke the truth with calm certainty. I wanted them to understand the depth of their betrayal without descending into bitterness. But I also knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. So I made the call to Susan, my lawyer. Our first meeting was quiet but purposeful. She laid out my options clearly, revising my will to exclude those who had disrespected me, creating legal safeguards to protect my assets, ensuring my voice would be heard even if I was silenced at family gatherings. As we spoke, I felt a sense of control return to me, a reminder that while I couldn't undo what had happened, I could shape what would happen next. Susan looked at me and said softly, "Evelyn, this is about more than money. It's about dignity. You're taking back what's rightfully yours." The following days were a blur of phone calls and paperwork. I felt the weight of every decision, every signature. It was exhausting, but necessary. Meanwhile, family life continued its uneasy dance. Mark called occasionally, his voice hesitant, full of awkward pauses. Karen never reached out. When I stopped by their house to pick up some things, I was met with cold glances and curt answers. At the grocery store, I ran into old neighbors who whispered behind their hands, eyes flickering with sympathy and curiosity. I was becoming an outsider in the only world I'd known. But in that isolation, I found clarity. I began to understand the unspoken truths of my family, the resentments and fears Karen hid behind her sharp edges, the silence Mark used to avoid conflict, the way love sometimes gets tangled with pain and pride. One afternoon, as I sat by my window watching the snow fall, I remembered the years when Mark was a boy, how we used to build snowmen together, his laughter ringing clear and bright. I allowed myself a small smile through the tears. Those memories were mine to keep, untouchable by anger or betrayal. One night, Karen sent a message. Cold, brief, but loaded with accusation. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she wrote. "If you want respect, earn it." I stared at those words, feeling the sting but also the irony. Who was she to judge my worth? I chose not to reply. Instead, I drafted a letter. Not for Karen, but for myself. A letter of strength, of resolve. I wrote, "I am more than their words. I am more than their silence. I am worthy of respect, of love, of dignity, and I will not be forgotten." The days grew colder, and with them, my resolve grew stronger. I was no longer just the woman who had been cast into the garage that Thanksgiving. I was a woman reclaiming her place, not just in my family, but in my own life, and I was ready for whatever came next. Winter tightened its grip over Ohio, but inside me, a different kind of cold was settling. Not the bitter chill of snow or wind, but the cold clarity of resolve. I had made my choice. The time for pain and silence was over. It was time for the family to see the cost of their cruelty. The weeks leading up to the final meeting with Susan, my lawyer, were filled with anticipation and quiet reflection. Each page I signed was a step toward reclaiming my dignity, a shield forged from years of sacrifice and love that had been so carelessly dismissed. Susan was a steady presence through it all, her professionalism a balm to my bruised spirit. "You're not just protecting your assets, Evelyn," she said softly one afternoon as we reviewed the revised will. "You're sending a message. A message they won't forget." And that was exactly what I intended. When I finally shared the news with Mark and Karen, their reactions were predictably raw. Karen's lips tightened into a thin line. Mark's eyes darted between us, searching for a way to bridge the growing chasm. "You don't have to do this, Mom," Mark said, voice thick with unease. "We're family." "Family," I echoed, the word bitter on my tongue, "is more than just blood, Mark. It's about respect. Something I haven't felt in a long time." Karen shot me a glare that could freeze fire. You think you're so high and mighty? You're punishing us for one bad night. One bad night. I repeated. One bad night where I was made to eat in a garage because I smelled like hospital. One bad night that shattered years of love and trust. Their silence was answer enough. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of tension and quiet confrontations. Family gatherings became battlegrounds of unspoken resentments and forced smiles. I watched from the sidelines as Karen whispered behind cupped hands, casting shadows that reached across the room. Mark struggled, torn between loyalty to his wife and the mother who had given him everything. Our conversations grew terse, laden with unsaid words and aching hopes for reconciliation. But I stood firm. I refused to be a shadow in my own family story. The day the new will was revealed, the atmosphere was electric with disbelief and fury. Faces turned pale as the lawyer read aloud. Names crossed out, inheritances reallocated. Karen's hands trembled. Mark's jaw clenched tightly. Do you understand what this means? I asked, my voice steady but filled with the weight of years. It means you've destroyed your own family, Karen spat back. No, I said. It means I've protected myself. From disrespect, from neglect, from being treated like I'm invisible. Tears welled in my eyes, not from pain, but from the fierce release of standing my ground. In the days that followed, letters arrived at their doors, calm, composed, yet unmistakably clear. If I'm not good enough to eat with you, you're not good enough to inherit me. Words that echoed the cold garage where I had spent that Thanksgiving night, alone and rejected. I watched as the family grappled with the consequences, the fallout rippling through their lives, forcing reflection where there had been denial. Yet, amidst the turmoil, I found a strange peace. I had reclaimed my voice, my dignity. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was no longer walking it alone. Friends reached out, old neighbors offered warm smiles, and new connections blossomed from the ashes of pain. I realized then that family is not just who shares your blood, but who respects your heart. And I was ready to build that family on my terms. Winter had passed, and with the first tentative buds of spring, a subtle change stirred within me. The cold that had once gripped my heart began to thaw, replaced by something softer, a quiet peace that came not from forgetting the past, but from embracing my own strength. The family gatherings I once feared became moments of observation rather than participation. I no longer sought their approval or validation. Their absence at my table was a wound, yes, but one I no longer carried alone. Instead, I found new family, friends who cherished me, neighbors who stopped by for tea, even strangers whose kindness reminded me that respect and love still existed beyond bloodlines. I realized that dignity is not something granted. It is something fiercely claimed. One afternoon, sitting on my porch with a warm cup of tea, I thought about that bitter Thanksgiving night, the night they made me eat in the garage. It was a night of pain, yes, but it was also the night I found my voice. I no longer smelled like hospital. I smelled like resilience. Mark eventually reached out, his voice tentative, filled with regret. We talked, honestly, painfully, about the fractures between us. I didn't promise forgiveness right away. Healing, I told him, takes time. Karen remained distant, her coldness an unhealed scar. But I was no longer waiting for them to define my worth. I was living for me. As the sun set on another day, I felt grateful. Not just for what I had lost, but for what I had gained. Self-respect, peace, and the courage to walk forward unafraid. The years ahead stretched before me, unknown, perhaps challenging, but mine to shape. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. If I'm not good enough to eat with you, you're not good enough to inherit me. Those words lingered, not as a curse, but as a testament to a woman who refused to be invisible, who fought for her place, and who found strength in standing alone. And in that strength, I discovered the true meaning of family.